December 2013. I used to work about 30 miles away from where I live. One night, I had been stuck in heavy traffic coming home. I take Lasix, so after a while, I really had to go to the bathroom. I kept telling myself that I was almost home and tried to hold it until I got there. By the time I got to my exit, I knew I wasn't going to make it to my house, so I pulled up to an area where Fidelity Investments is located and found an area that was isolated. This area is heavily wooded with walking trails and a lot of game, but it is also in a very populated area. I pulled up a little side drive off one of the main roads. That little drive is about 100 feet long with only room for one car. It went up in elevation and had bushes on the right side facing the main road. On the left side, there was a guardrail and a view of the valley below. The area up there is huge and isolated, with several buildings that are all spaced out. The place is dark at night because there are intermittent streetlights up there. At night, it's pretty deserted too. A few cars go through that area, though, because it's a shortcut people use to go from Taylor Mill over to 3L Highway, where there are stores, restaurants, etc. When you're up there, you're above everything around this area. When I stopped, I got out of my car, waited a moment, and looked around to make sure there were no other cars. It was winter, so the bushes between where I was and the road below me didn't have many leaves on them. Because of that, you could see right through them. I was up on this little rise, about 20 or 30 feet above the drive, which was 4 lanes wide. To the left of me was a streetlight and more woods that went down another hill to the main road. I went to the back of my car and did what I had to do. When I finished, I stood up, and all at once, every hair on my body stood up. I knew I wasn't alone. I scanned the area in front of me, and must have heard something behind me, because I turned around and there were 3 deer standing there, all huddled up together, between my car and the guardrail. They weren't looking at me. They were looking across the road. I looked back over there, and that was when I saw a figure standing between the bushes in front of it and the tree line behind it. It was huge. I stand 5'5". Some of those bushes were about 6 feet tall, but they only came up to about the collarbone area on this thing. Due to the streetlight to the right of it, about 20 feet away, I was able to get a pretty clean outline of this thing. It had a large dog-shaped head and pointed ears. I couldn't make out its neck, but I could make out massive shoulders. That's when it growled at me. It was a deep vibration I could feel in my chest. My body just took over at that point. I have to explain this part of it to you. I worked security for years in California in the music business. As a woman, I have to really work out and train to defend myself. I kickboxed for 8 years and worked out every single day. I also train dogs, mainly Anatolian Shepherds and German Shepherds. Sometimes I have to establish who is the alpha, and to do that, I get them down, hold them in place, grab them by their ear, and growl until they submit. Then the training can start. So, when this thing growled at me, it was just pure instinct. I dropped down to a crouching position and growled right back at it. When I did that, it stopped growling and started sniffing the air. Its snout went up and turned its head slightly as it was sniffing. It then took a few steps forward. I was still crouched down on all fours, moved forward, still growling at the thing. When I did that, it stopped. I stood up, kept staring right at it. I never broke eye contact with it. Then, it slowly stepped back into the tree line until I couldn't make it out as clearly as before and started to move to the right of me. The deer were still behind me. They were so close I could have reached out and touched them. I waved my arms and told them to get out of there. When I did that, they went back over the guardrail and took off down the hill. That's when I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt this thing was trying to circle behind me, and I wasn't going to wait around for that. Do I think I scared it? No. But I do think I confused it for a couple of minutes, and that gave me some time to move. I had told my husband about what happened up there, but I didn't tell him exactly what I saw. He would think I was nuts, and to be honest, I thought I was a little crazy myself until I saw a picture of a dogman. I know there are other things in this world that can't be explained. I've seen them, but this was beyond any of those things. Since this happened, I can't take that shortcut through that area anymore. My husband took me back over that way once to see the area, and I was begging him to get me out of there the whole time. I thought I was going to throw up. The wildlife up there has almost totally disappeared. I never see anything up on the hills anymore. The street I live on is only about 1 mile or so down the hill from this place, and lately, we have seen coyotes on the streets, like they have been chased out, and pets here have started to go missing. We've also seen a large black figure moving through our backyards down here. The dogs throughout the neighborhood go crazy regularly now too. People were calling the cops when we saw that large black figure jumping fences. I'm concerned that it has come down the hill after eating everything up there. My husband and I live just outside of Helen. My husband can't sleep very well at night, and as such, he is up at all hours. For about the last 3 weeks, he has heard strange sounds late at night. He has gotten me up several times to listen. Whatever we are hearing is not anything we have ever heard before. All of the dogs go crazy, and whatever it is seems to move very quickly, attracting the dogs as it goes. It is very loud, and it more of a howl or scream. It does not sound like a bobcat or bear or anything else we have heard since living in Northeast Georgia. We have lived in this area for 9 years, and my husband has hunted all of his life. And it used to sound in the night, just not this one. When he woke me up to hear this, we jokingly said, maybe it's a Bigfoot. I got curious as to whether or not there had been any sightings in our area. I was camped about a mile from the shelter and was enjoying myself when I suddenly felt uneasy and decided to go to an omitted shelter where a man on the trail said other people were camping. As I went about 50 yards from where I was camping, I surprised something that I did not see, but it took off down the side of a cliff, and I just assumed it was a bear. When I got to the shelter, just after dark, I set up in the shelter. About 5:30 a.m., I heard a very loud, high-pitched howling sound, twice. That was like nothing I have ever heard or seen on TV. The first howl sounded like it was answered by the second, that was not quite as loud. I sat straight up and thought, what was that? I did not go back to sleep. It did not sound even close to any animal I have ever heard. It was about 11 p.m., and we had just laid down to sleep. We were staying in a cabin that we had rented for the weekend. I heard this high-pitched, horrific scream. It was close. It was not some faint, distant sound. It was very clear and very close. My first thought was a woman in distress, and then, about 20 seconds later, I heard it again. I also heard dogs barking above me, higher up on the ridge. This time, I realized it was probably not a human. The sound was forceful, deliberate, high-pitched, reverberating scream. Because I was inside the cabin, it is hard to tell how far away this was. I would guess within 750 feet, perhaps as close as 200 feet. The scream continued for about 4 or 5 more times, repeating every 25 seconds.
A friend and I were sitting
I have
in my
military
bedroom,
and hunting
hanging
experience,
out whenever we
and
both
have never
noticed
heard such a
something
sound.
moving on my
I
surveillance
cannot think
monitor.
of an animal that can make
I had a
this type of
camera
sound.
pointed down my
I will
driveway
never forget
so I
it.
could see
That's
whenever
for sure.
I had company drive up. When we both looked up, I saw what appeared to be a large canine running on all fours, and in mid-run, this thing came up on its hind legs and continued running across my field and across my driveway and into my brother's field on 2 legs. I was in shock, and my friend immediately turned to me with her mouth wide open. I asked her, "What did you just see?" And she replied with, "Well, what did you see?" I saw where this was going, so I then asked her, "How many legs was it running on?" She replied, "It was running on 4 but went to 2. I then had a cold chill run through my body as I knew she saw what I had seen. I jumped up and grabbed my night vision scope that I had recently purchased and ran to my front door with my friend behind me. I must admit, I was hesitant to open that door for fear of it maybe standing there, so I opened the door while letting out a roar as to maybe shock it if it was there, but it wasn't. Hey, I didn't know. I cautiously walked out on my front porch and took the scope and scanned the front field. There was nothing to be seen nor do I know which direction it went in, besides I had seen it last. I waited until daybreak and went out to where it crossed my driveway, and I found a paw print that was a good 12 by 12 inches. I was stunned. I just stood there looking back at the woods it had came from and looked south to where it was headed. I had no way to save the print and didn't think to take a picture at the time, nor was my camera recording at the time of the sighting either. From what I could see on the camera, this thing was massive in its upper body. I can still remember seeing the muscles flexing and the muscularity in its upper back as it came to its full height. It was running in weeds that came to my waist, but on all fours, it was a good 2 feet above them, and when it went to full height, I would estimate it to be a good 8 foot tall. Due to the camera showing only black and white, I didn't get to see its color, but I could tell you it was dark. Its head is something else that stands out, as I could see the snout and its pointed ears, which were laid back whenever it went to 2 legs. I am a research and development technician, so I am trained to watch for vivid details, and even though this thing was moving faster and faster than any human, I was transfixed on its form and what I was seeing. It was headed south into property that connects to the Stennis Space Center's buffer zone, which is over 100,000 acres of untouched and uninhabited acreage that was put aside for the space shuttle program in Hancock County since the mid-60s. So it is all the resources it needs in order to survive in those woods and to go undetected. I have always been an outdoors man, but since that sighting, I will not go out in the woods without a gun on me now. I know for a fact I do not want to run into that thing up close.
I have a personal experience that would like to relate. I would hesitate to call it an encounter because it was dark and from an undetermined distance, somewhere between 30 to 50 yards, and it was on an elevated plane to us, just outside of Helen, off of SR 75, north of the upper Chattahoochee River recreation area. If you go to the top of the mountain north of the park clearing, that's where my experience was. I had my first experience there in the year of 1990, while a group of 5 friends and I were walking late at night. We saw something on a bridge, and it stood up, clearly visible, but only as a silhouette in the moonlight, and jumped a very large distance. It then seemed to stride over the backside of the ridge away from us. It was actually very quiet. It didn't make a sound before we saw it stand, and we didn't hear it land or stride away, as if it was stalking or observing us. Of course, we were all extremely scared after seeing it initially. Again, it was at night and far away so that we couldn't get a clear description, but we all saw it and were all struck with a panic-like fear. I also went back with my dad, who was a very harsh skeptic, in the summer of 2006. We did not see anything, but I had noted a couple of other things at this later date. It was summer. First, there was a very strong odor that seemed to hang in a centralized area the entire weekend. Secondly, the park rangers came by to tell us that the night before, in the same place we were camping, last people left food out, went into town after nightfall, and returned to find the camp completely ransacked. So we needed to pack our food up, or better yet, keep it in the vehicles back on the road. They said the bears were foraging
and getting brave because of the onset of the drought. Again, no sightings, but interesting because nobody actually spotted the bear either. And lastly, along the mountain road at a height of about 10 feet off the ground, there was a 4-inch sapling wrung and twisted completely around. My dad once spent 3 months in the woods living off the land in the late 70s in North Georgia. It's the number one reason he is skeptical, he says. That long in the woods, and he would have seen something if it was out there. But when I noticed the odor and asked him if it was a skunk, he said no, not really. More likely a wet bear that got sprayed by a skunk, but it had a more dank odor than just skunk. And also, when I pointed out the wrung tree and asked him what it could have possibly been, he had no clue. I work in agricultural marketing. My job is to determine the amount of meat that will be derived from individual cow carcasses after slaughter, and before they are split into primal cuts. To determine this, we have to compare the conformation of the animal, or the ratio of muscling to fat, and factor in the skeletal structure of the animal. So, if I apply this to what I remember seeing when I was younger, this creature was absolutely huge, at least 8 feet tall, and weighing easily around 550 pounds. It was tall, but had a slightly more narrow build in the shoulder area width than the animal in the Patterson film. It was still too large to be a human, wider and thicker muscled than a man, but not as stocky as the Patterson footage. That is why I say it may not be heavier. In the spring of 1997, I had to make a trip to Jonesboro, Arkansas. Since I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, the best way was across Highway 463, across the top of the state. I think that's the highway number. It's the only time I've ever been on that road. Anyway, I finished my business and was returning home that evening. It was around 9 p.m. when I passed through a small town named Salem. With the town behind me, I was once again the only car on the highway. My headlights were bright. The windows were up because I had the heater on, and the radio was playing softly. There was a clearance of maybe 20 feet between the edge of the road and the woods when I noticed what I thought was a tree standing right beside the road. As I got closer, the tree turned and took just a few steps and was at the woods. It was huge and had long, matted hair. Actually, it looked quite nasty. It never looked directly at me. It was slipping into the woods as I passed to the point of it going out of my headlights beam. I stomped on the gas with everything I had and didn't slow down till I was safely in the lights of the next town. As I drove wildly down the highway at 90 miles an hour, that's the fastest the car I was driving would go, I kept looking in the rearview mirror to make sure it wasn't chasing me. I know that sounds nutty, but at the time it seemed like a really good idea. I was perfectly sober at the time. Maybe that should be a lesson to me. I never gave much thought about Bigfoot until that night. Now, I know they exist. I saw one with my own eyes. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Late March or early April 2009. Approximately 18:15 hours. I was southbound on GA 75 between Helen and Cleveland, about 0.2 miles north of Duncan Bridge, which is Highway 384. As I rounded a bend, I saw something getting ready to cross the road from east to west. As I slowed, my first thought was that somebody was dressed in a costume, but I dismissed that idea because every pickup around here had a shotgun in the back window, and a good percentage, like myself, had a gun in the car. When he heard me, he stopped on the shoulder. He did not look at me for a few seconds, but then slowly, he turned toward me, looked, then continued to turn 180 degrees and walk into the woods. I was unable to pull off the shoulder and park because of hay bales and plastic used to stop erosion. Traffic was backing up behind me, so I drove to Duncan Bridge, then left on a private road, with the hope of seeing him again. No luck. What I saw, he appeared to be 6'2", 6'4". He was standing erect, but had a slightly hollow chest. His legs and torso seemed normal, as compared to a human, but his arms were longer. His fur was full and sleek. It had a shine to it, a medium light brown. He looked healthy. It was his eyes that I remember the most. He looked at me with an intelligence that you don't see in an animal. The only other time I experienced that was with a dolphin. It was on Thanksgiving night in 1999. I was driving home from my daughter's apartment in Cleveland, Georgia, when suddenly I thought I saw a man crossing the road on Highway 75. I hit my brakes and realized that it was wearing no clothes and was covered in hair like a bear, but it walked upright and hunched more like a man or a huge ape-like thing. It was definitely not a bear. It was large and long-armed. It turned its head and looked over at me, then swiftly jumped down a huge drop and disappeared into the woods. It all happened so fast. I was shocked and went home, not sure of what I believed I had seen at the moment. Before then, I had never been sure if something like that had existed, and I tried to rationalize what I had seen. But now, I am convinced that it was, in fact, neither man, nor bear, nor simple ape. I cannot prove what it actually was, but I can say that it was quite amazing. Either that night or the next morning, I called animal control, saying that I saw a bear, believing that it wouldn't be taken serious if I said what I know that I saw. There were cattle nearby that needed protection. In May of 1993, some of my friends of mine and I decided to go trout fishing above Helen, Georgia. After fishing for a couple of hours, one guy and I decided to go upriver to find some new spots. So we started walking up an old roadbed that followed along the river. We eventually got to a spot where there was a gully across the road. At one time, there must have been a bridge. While me and my friend were standing there, we heard a loud thud behind us. As we turned around, there was a big 10-foot log, about the diameter of a car tire, lying there. Take into account just a second ago, that log was not there. We climbed over the log and started to head back down the road, when all of a sudden, we heard leaves shuffling above us. Both my friend and I had a strange feeling as we looked at each other. At the same time, we both looked up above us, and there was a Bigfoot, standing 10 to 15 feet from us. We hauled ass out of there. We finally made it back to where our other friends were and told them what happened. They wanted to go see. The guy that was with me said no and went back to the vehicle. I took the other two guys to show them, and on the way there, we saw a footprint in the mud that looked like somebody walking barefoot, except it was approximately 18 inches in length. We walked back and saw nothing else. I'm 6'3" and 290 pounds, and this thing dwarfed me big time. It was at least 9 feet tall and about 4 feet across at the shoulders. It had to weigh around 800 pounds. It really looked like a big human covered in long, shaggy black hair. The thing that got me was its reddish brown eyes. It took years for me to go back up there fishing, and when I did, I would not go alone. It's weird because sometimes when you're up there, you feel safe, but other times I feel like something is watching you. Since then, I have heard wood knocking, vocalizations, and had rocks thrown at me. I do not hesitate to go up there anymore, but I will not go alone. Hi, me and my friend have been hearing some weird stuff while we were hunting. My friend heard the sounds first. Then I heard them the next evening, right before dark. The sounds sound like something is screaming, but kind of high-pitched screams. My friend also thought he heard something throwing stuff around his tree stand. The reason I think it is a Bigfoot is because there is some property behind ours, and they have been clear-cutting all of it. I think it has run the Bigfoot onto our property. If I see anything else or hear anything else, I will give you more information.
My girlfriend and I traveled to this area at 11:30 that night to build a campfire and relax from the daily grind. She and I didn't have to work Wednesday, so the late hour didn't matter. At about 11:30, we found a suitable site, approximately 7 to 8 miles in. There are only a dozen or so clearings for camping on the trail. Our site was on the trail, a clearing big enough to circle my truck around. It had 2 other trails at the back corners. One didn't go far before growth took over. The other looked like it might be passable, as far as I could tell. At 1 a.m., I was sitting on the tailgate and my girlfriend a few feet away tending the fire. Then we heard a loud, high-pitched scream that reverberated through the dense forest. My girlfriend got scared and asked me what it was. I have been an outdoorsman my whole life, hunting, fishing, camping, and studying animals like a religion. I have never heard of anything like that can scream. I told my girlfriend to be quiet, and maybe it would go off again. The moon was high and bright, to be full, not yet. The trail was lit good, so I looked down the trail and I looked the way we came. In the middle of the trail, a large, bulky figure stood. The way the light fell on its features, I believe it was facing me from about 30 yards distant. I thought at first it might be a tree or bush, but it had a discernible head, arms, torso, and legs. I went and got my girlfriend, not saying anything to upset her. If it turned out to be a tree, she would be mad for teasing her. I looked and the figure was gone. Back at the fire, the animal behind us screamed, same as before, except this time, it sounded just inside the forest cover. Before we could react, a similar, more distant call came from the forest in front of us. Was this the thing I had seen? I don't know. At that, I threw everything in the truck and at my girlfriend's panic. I shoveled sand onto the fire while she screamed hurry. I jumped into the truck and hid out a lot faster than we ever drove in. I should start off explaining that my partner and I are experienced Bigfoot investigators who are in a unique situation, as we have a family group living in our research area. Last October, during the full moon, my partner and I were on our hilltop having quite a bit of success with 2 juveniles and 1 adult that we noticed. We could hear them walking in the leaf litter, and every once in a while, we could also hear a clack or wood knock from different directions. After a while, it seemed the feeling of fun for them dissipated and became a lot more cautious. Mike heard something to our north and went a ways down to investigate, while I stayed by the camp, just to make sure it wasn't a diversion. He came back in a rush and said he had seen one of the young ones come out of the woodline, running for the other side of the fire break, and what was following, he said, he couldn't comprehend. It was about 6 feet tall, with pointy ears and a long snout. At this point, I have to say that neither of us have really given any creed to the whole Dogman, Wolfman, Grassman theory. We just thought it was a mistaken identification of a Bigfoot or a bear. I had purchased a .40 caliber handgun and some hydroshock ammunition for it earlier that day, so it was in my vehicle. After Mike had explained what he had seen, I retrieved my weapon and loaded it. All the while, we could hear the 2 young ones chattering and the big one stomping all to our backside. They were pissed or upset about something, and they never acted that way with us. I had Mike take me down the fire break to where he saw this creature, and with spotlights, we scanned the area. We could hear something moving around and a few short growls. Finally, Mike caught it with the spotlight, going between trees, and what I witnessed is something I would never have dreamed of seeing, except on a movie screen. A 6-foot wolf, walking on its hind legs. I fired my weapon in the air, and it turned to the southeast into the woods. We cautiously made our way back to camp, but we could hear this thing pacing us to our left. As we got back to camp, we kept listening to this thing approaching us from the woods. Mike turned on the spotlight, and I leveled my gun wherever the sound was coming from. It was approaching us without fear, and it felt to both of us like it was stalking us, as it was one of our juvies that Mike had witnessed. It came out from between the trees,
and I shot it square in the ribs at about 20 yards away. We measured the next day, and I am a very good shot. I saw the wound, and know without a doubt I hit it. It fell to the ground, but immediately got up and ran to the southeast. We could hear it crash through the brush, and we even heard it fall down or trip over something. But it continued to head in pretty much a southerly direction, down the hill, paralleling the firebreak. We were both freaked out by this time, and broke camp and left. The next morning, I loaded up a few extra clips, and we went back up to see if it died somewhere close, or was just wounded, so we felt we had to track it down. We did track it from the point where I shot it, all the way down the canyon, and even found where it made such a ruckus when it fell. The leaf litter was up all-ended, and was fairly easy to track. At one point, we did find a perfect canine track in the mud ridge, but it was over 8 inches across. The thing that absolutely baffled both of us was that there was no blood trail. None. We both saw the bullet hit, yet no blood? We tracked it all the way down the canyon until we lost the trail. We talked to a Native American couple we know, and they immediately said Skinwalker. We contacted a few other investigators to try and figure out what in the hell happened. I mentioned before that neither of us took any creed from any Dogman reportings, but I do know that neither of us wants to experience it again, and I have never gone out in the woods unarmed since that day. July 1st, 2014. I was on patrol as a deputy sheriff for the county, and was usually assigned to the Highway 13 and Highway 30 corridors. However, I recall that particular July 1st, however, that a young man, 16 or 17 years old, had been sucked into a storm drain, which emptied into Cedar Lake near the Quaker Oats plant. This is a place with heavy foot traffic, and located in an urban setting. The area is also bordered by Mohawk Park. As the search went on into the night, the local PD got the county involved. I parked my cruiser at what I believe was the electric company's storage yard. The yard had what I estimated to be a 10-foot fence that ran parallel to a paved bike trail on the other side, which runs a large concrete spillway to siphon off floodwaters. I arrived at what I estimate to be roughly 11:30 p.m. to approximately 11:45 p.m. I estimate only because I assure you there never was, nor will be, an official statement or record with my name on it telling this story. As I left the lot, I was at the north end of the lake and headed west on foot. There was a lot of brush and saplings between the spillway and the trail, so I proceeded onto the point of the trail that turns south near where Cedar Lake empties into the Cedar River. This is all under the railroad tracks leading into the Quaker Oats. There are multiple tracks at the turn I mentioned before, and the only track furthest from myself had a train on it. With my attention on the spillway, I hardly noticed at first a faint red-colored light, a distance north from my position. It was coming down the track on the other side of the train. I thought it perhaps the trail lights of a car. Not being that patrol route, I had no knowledge that there was, in fact, no road in that direction. There ain't much things in the world that scare me. Put simply, I've seen some things in my days. But nothing prepared me for that night. The lights disappeared, and that was that. Or so I figured. About 5 minutes pass before I hear a snorting, almost sniffing sound coming from the other side of the tracks. When I turned, the first thing I saw were the eyes. They glowed a dull red. The thing was at least 8 foot tall, pushing 450. I judge this by the fact that I am 6'4", and weigh 280 pounds. I turned my light, and to this day, I wish I hadn't. It had pointed ears and a long muzzle, and it looked me right in the face before it bolted into the timber. It was not a mask, and it was not a person in a costume. Who would walk up on an armed man, with a police radio in full uniform, and risk getting shot? I remember it was so surreal, so final, I guess. I know it's in the dark now. People can say or think what they want, but even with a chambered round and a full magazine in a Glock 40, didn't feel like enough firepower. I unholstered and fell back toward the trail and to the electric company storage yard. Putting the fence to my back, I made a hasty retreat to a lot with my cruiser. I don't think I holstered my pistol till I got out of the park. I never spoke of it then, and honestly don't know why I am now, but one thing is for certain. It knew I was there, and it was watching my every move. I'll never go back, and I no longer work with the department since becoming a minister. But I still carry a Glock with hollow point rounds tipped with silver if, and I rarely do, leave my home at night. I was sitting on my couch watching TV with my small dogs around me. My male Yorkie saw it when I went out our back door. It was still daylight. I thought it was a man at first, but it was too large, too dark, and fleeting. The dog jumped up and ran to the back door, but I moved slowly over there, being a little frightened. When I looked out the door, it was gone. My first impression of it being a man was because of the general shape, but the dark figure wasn't wearing clothes and had to be well over 10 feet tall just to see it through the doorway like I did. I was able to see the upper body from where I was sitting. The porch drops off with the stairway to the patio around the pool. That's where it was walking rapidly next to the house. By the time I got to the door to look out, it was over the fence and gone. My instinct was to check the gate, and I saw it was still latched and locked, never having been opened. It wasn't a human. It was too large. It wasn't a bear. It was running upright. I can't come up with any other thing that could be that tall and that could do what it did. And having seen what I saw in 1999, I don't take this very lightly. It was June 15th, 1997, Father's Day. My friends and I had been rock climbing at Raven Cliff Falls in the Chattahoochee National Forest, just outside of Helen, Georgia. After climbing all day Friday and Saturday morning, a rainstorm made us pull down our rigging and head out of the woods. We drove down to Helen and walked around until about 5 p.m. We filled up the truck and headed back towards Raven Cliff to find a campsite for the night. We found a small dirt road that had been barricaded with a large dirt brim. We drove over the berm and drove into the forest. We drove until we had half a tank of gas, which put us several miles back in. Around 11 or 11:30 p.m., we found a small clearing and decided to stop and make camp. Once we exited our truck, we found a shallow hole that was about 3 to 4 feet in diameter that appeared to be an old fire pit. It had a large log laying on one side of it. We gathered wood for a fire and began to set up camp. Since the weather was nice, we decided to not mess with tents and hammocks. After about 30 minutes of lying down, I heard a noise in the tree line on the left side of our camp. It sounded like an animal moving through the brush. I dismissed it and tried to go back to sleep. I continued to hear the noise for several minutes. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, hiking and camping. The next thing I heard was nothing I had ever heard before. I heard a grunt and then a scream that did not sound like any other animal. It sounded like it came from maybe 50 to 100 yards away. I asked what it was, and my friends did not have an answer. We began kidding around, saying that we were out a good way, and it could be a Sasquatch. I did not go to sleep for a while after that scream. Finally, I drifted to sleep and slept until daybreak. As we got up to get our gear packed, we noticed prints next to the fire that none of us had ever seen before. They definitely were not human, but were too big for any animal known to be an indigenous to that area. We quickly loaded up and left the area. I was deer hunting on Pigeon Mountain and was following a group of deer when I shot and wounded an almost solid black buck with a large rack. The buck followed a well-worn game trail, and I had trailed the deer by blood drops. It was getting dark, and the terrain was getting difficult to continue, and I had no light. I had to turn and come down the mountain. I began to feel like I was not alone. There were none of the normal animal sounds, like birds and squirrels, etc. I had heard something coming down the mountain, taking a parallel path that I was taking. I could not see anything. There were limbs breaking, leaves rustling, and then I would hear nothing. I had unloaded my gun for safety and reloaded because I had never heard an animal move through the woods like this one. Myself, one other person, and the owner were the only people allowed to hunt in the area, and the terrain it was using was too rough for a human to travel, much less move at the speed this animal was. 1 minute, it would sound like a raging bull, and the next minute, it would move down the mountain, not making a sound. I heard a grunt and a growl. I was terrified and felt as I was being stalked by something I had never encountered before. When I stopped, so did it. When I moved slow, it moved slow. When I moved faster, it moved faster. I was worried when I would hear nothing. I reached the base of the mountain and had taken a wrong turn and had put myself in front of a large briar patch. It did not let that stop me. I drove through the briars, cutting and scratching myself. I finally reached the safety of my truck and once again heard the grunting noise from behind me. I did not return to look for the buck I had shot or ever hunt in that area again. I did not ever see anything, but something large was in the woods that night. I have not felt safe in the woods since. I had hunted, fished, and farmed in that area all of my life. I felt as though I knew all the animals in the woods and the sounds they made as they moved. I was taught to stalk, hunt by an employee who worked on our farm, and he had lived in the Smoky Mountains and fed his family by hunting game. I had heard deer grunt before, and this was no deer grunting. August was 17 years old at the time. My dad and mom had taken my little brother and sister to Tucson to do something for the day. We lived in a trailer in a rural area outside of Sierra Vista. We had 2 horses, 2 dogs, a cow, and some chickens on the small amount of land we had. As the eldest son, it was my job to feed and take care of them. On the night in question, it was a stormy monsoon rain with thunder and lightning going on. But like monsoons can be, they rage and then settle into the lull and rage again. I was getting ready to settle down and watch a good movie when all of a sudden, my 2 dogs start barking and wouldn't shut up. When I told them to calm down, in fact. In the previous week or so before, my dogs had been acting up and barking a lot at night. I just attributed this to coyotes that I'd heard howling in the night. So I got my dad's rifle and just 1 bullet, in case I had to shoot to scare off the coyote or kill it if rabid. I rested the loaded rifle near the wall by the back door and turned on the floodlights outside the trailer. The rain had just stopped, so I looked out by the window near the front door and saw our 2 horses and cow staring as if through the front door to the back door of the trailer where the dogs were barking. I thought, maybe they're scared of the coyotes. So I grabbed the rifle and opened up the back door. As I was getting near the back door, I heard my dogs whimpering and crying. Now I was thinking, could it be a pack of coyotes? So I put a few bullets in my pocket, figuring I could load them if I didn't like what I saw. I opened the door and the darndest thing happened. My 2 dogs beeline rushed past me to the center of the trailer and hunkered down, right in the kitchen. Mud is everywhere on the floor, from their paws, and I'm pissed because I have to clean it up now. So I closed the door and go to try to get my dogs to get out, but they wouldn't budge and squirmed out of my arms when I tried to grab them. They were terrified. Now I was mad at the coyotes and grabbed the rifle to go run them off or kill them. The trailer sits on a foundation of blocks. The front and back doors are accessible by a small set of small stairs. I'm 5'6", by the way. I opened the back door and was looking out in the darkness. At that point, I was about to step out when I saw a set of eyes looking back at me out of the darkness. From the top of my head in the trailer to the ground is around 7+ feet or so, and here is a set of eyes looking at me, level and square on. I'm like, darn, coyote must be on a small gravel hill. We used to pave the road, or it's a bird on a mesquite bush. But I was thinking to myself, what monsoon was awfully bad and rained hard? What kind of bird would hunker down on a mesquite bush? And why would a coyote be out in a downpour? So I'm raising my rifle and drawing a bead on the eyes when lightning lights up the night. All of a sudden, the lightning illuminates a small gravel hill that's like 6 feet high and the surrounding mesquite bushes. The light winks out as fast as it appeared from the lightning though. There was nothing on the gravel hill and no bird on any of the mesquite bushes. Then it dawned on me. Whatever it was very tall and was still staring at me. A sense of dread crept over me all of a sudden, as I realized that the rifle had only one measly bullet, and if I missed, there was no way I'd be able to reload in time before this thing, whatever it was on me. I kept the gun pointed at it as I quickly closed the door. I locked the door, realizing this trailer would never withstand whatever it was that was out there if it attacked. I locked the front door and turned on all of the lights in the house. I grabbed all the bullets, the 30-06 and the .22 rifle, and then got in the kitchen with the dogs and I loaded each rifle full on. I hugged my dogs and prayed that whatever it was went away and didn't attack. I stayed awake that whole night until my parents got back. My dad was furious that all the lights were on. My dad checked outside though for coyotes, but whatever it was gone. Some say skinwalker, but I think otherwise. July 2nd, 2015. While scanning the valley floor for sheep a mile from my house, I noticed two loping figures. Initially, I just thought the figures were coyotes or stray dogs, but as the two figures neared an old sunken vehicle, I realized that the things were about the size of the vehicle itself, nearly 8 feet long. No animal could be that big on the res. I watched the two figures until they disappeared in the woods across the valley. It was starting to get dark, but the moon was bright enough, so I walked without a light. As I walked down the mountain, I heard something yelling. It was like a howl or a yell. I started to hurry. Then, when I got to my house, I locked the door and spent the night listening to the strangest sounds. I'm sure it was a skinwalker, but I found this and was surprised at what I saw. I will try to explain what I saw. While returning home from a day of walking in a clear-cut looking for Indian artifacts, the clear-cut was located at the foot of the southeast end of the Horse Range Mountain near Loudsville Campground in White County, Georgia. I was driving on a Forestry Service road when I saw what at first I thought was a bear about 200 yards away. But when I stopped and watched it, I saw that it was not. It walked upright with a slight stoop for about 75 yards down a hill toward a small creek that was bordered by trees and brush. The road crossed the creek, so I thought if I went down on the road, I could see it as it came out the other side. But it did not come out, and I did not get out of the Bronco to go looking for it. I did not hear any sound, and to be honest, I did not tell anybody about it for years until I told my son Eric. I went out in a pigeon on 9/27/11, and what I heard wasn't any animals I'm used to hearing on Pigeon Mountain. It was a deep growl, and then a long mellow scream, and I heard the same noise below my house. I lived just about 3 miles from Pigeon Mountain on Moon Lake Road, where a couple months ago I heard the same scream on Saddleline Road below where I live. I'm going back to Pigeon Mountain tomorrow night and try to see if I hear it again. Two friends of mine and myself were pushing a cave lead and cornfield sink on the east side of Pigeon Mountain. We came out of the lead at about 3 a.m. and started gathering our caving gear together for the half-mile walk to the car. As we were about to leave, the strangest call I have ever heard came from the opposite side of the sink from us. Distance would have been about 900 feet. The three of us have been woodsmen all of our lives, but none of us have ever heard a call like that. It sounded like 4 different animals in one, all powered by what must have been an enormous set of lungs. Hearing the vocalization, the three of us looked at each other, saucer-eyed and not saying a word. Each of us was hoping the others would pipe up with a logical explanation for what we heard. Needless to say, since we had been planning to leave anyway, we beat a hasty retreat to the vehicles. 8 years ago, my brother John was heading home from his girlfriend's house off a country road outside of Boulder, 11 miles south of Pinedale, Wyoming. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. when he saw what he said was a huge dog traversing down the slope of the south side of the road and commencing to run alongside his pickup. He was driving a 6970 Ford F-150 Highboy, which came from the factory lifted. The dogman was running with him at around 40 miles an hour. There is a 2 to 3 foot barrow ditch running along the road, and the dogman's head was level with his as he was driving, so John puts its height at around 7 to 8 feet. It was dark in color, with gray or white on its muzzle, running from its nose to under its eyes, which were amber in color. He sped up to 45, and then the dogman kept up with him, often looking inside the pickup. He said at around 50 miles an hour, he lost it, and that's really all he would ever tell me. I'll start off by saying that I have never believed in any of these sort of creatures, but I saw something in early 2009 that really disturbed me and is making me change my mind. I was not under the influence of any drugs, and I have better than average eyesight, and the lighting was nearing sunset, but I was still able to see clearly. So I'll get this underway and explain my story, and maybe someone can shed some light on this for me. I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is in west central Minnesota, about an hour drive from Fargo, North Dakota. My mother-in-law lives out in the country, about 3 or 4 miles out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there a while with my wife and her mother while they went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie. So I left the house at about 6:30, 6:45 to meet them at the theater. About 2 miles away from their house, on a country road known as Wendell Road, along the Mustinka River, I saw 3 white-tailed deer. 2 of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings, and a larger doe, who I assumed was their mother. Me, being an avid hunter, lover of wildlife, and future wildlife biologist, stopped to look at the deer. I should also mention that I hunt in the area and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mustinka River, so there were hardly any trees, except for one. Maybe because I didn't see it there, but because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on my side of the road, looking at the deer, and to my belief, hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, taking no notice of me, even though I was in my truck, no more than 40 yards away, with a clear view, with nothing obstructing my view of it. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as shocking was the fact that it seemed to be a 2-legged creature and not a 4-legged one. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs and were rather slender and long, very unlike a wolf. The creature looked as though it had stood upright. It would be over 7 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a slender waist, thick, muscular thighs, and being as there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. He was deep, dark brown in color throughout the body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in shock, the deer ran off. Then, something amazing happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing his meal. He just sat there, looking at me, and blinking, but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't feel much like trudging through the 3.5 feet of snow with the possibility of a monster lurking in the area who is currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So, at about 10 a.m., I went back there and walked down to the tree. Under the tree, there was no snow, so there were no tracks that I could see, but leading up to the tree, there were 3 tracks leading in from my grandmother-in-law's field, which was hard, black dirt. And if you know what a Minnesota field looks like in late winter, early spring, you can't make out anything of the dirt. The tracks I did find were only about 6 to 7 inches in length, but were clearly canine prints, with the exception of 4-toe-looking marks in the snow.